Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the first session of tonight's PEO's 2022 Council Elections All Candidates Meetings. My name is Arthur Sinclair, and I'll be the moderator for tonight's discussion. Tonight we hear from the candidates for Western Regional Councillors. The two candidates for this position are Wayne Kershaw and Vicki Hillborn. The electronic meeting with the candidates via webcast enables voters to learn more about the candidates and PEO issues, so more of them will vote. Voters were able to pose questions online in advance of this discussion. We have received a number of them. We'll try to get as many questions of those questions as possible. In accordance with the approved protocol for the all candidates meetings, as moderator, I may shorten the question and not read out preambles to questions, may select any question, may remove offensive and duplicate questions, and may add questions not on the platform. Each candidate will be provided 2 minutes for the opening remarks. I will then direct a question to a candidate. That candidate will have 1 minute to respond to the question. After the candidate has responded, the remaining candidate will have 1 minute to address the first candidate's response to the question. Following the question period, the candidates will have 90 seconds each for closing remarks. The order of speakers was determined by a draw earlier this evening. The views and opinions expressed on this broadcast do not necessarily reflect the views of PEO and are the responsibilities of the candidates. So, without further delay, let's get started with opening remarks. The first candidate for Western Regional Councillor is Wayne Kershaw.
Thank you, Arthur, and good evening, everyone. As was stated, my name is Wayne Kershaw, and I'm currently running for the position of Western Regional Councillor. I believe in the need to improve the perceived value of the engineered license, both with the general public and most importantly, with the membership itself. I believe in proper support for chapters through adequate funding and strong leadership at both RCC and at Council, and improve membership engagement through enhanced communication and outreach in all matters affecting us as engineers. Now that the PEO Council is in its final stages of its multi-year restructuring project, we are entering into a critical phase where we need to ensure that these instructors work well for everyone. My experience within the chapter system, within Council, and within the various task forces and committees on which I participated will enable me to provide the knowledge and support needed for this phase, particularly when it comes to how the chapters can best contribute within this new system. In the past, I have fought to ensure that your voices are being heard. If you let me, I will continue to do so and work within the new governance structure diligently and with passion to ensure that we are moving forward in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Wayne. The second candidate for Western Regional Councillor is Vicky Hilborn.
Hey everyone, and thanks for taking the time to attend this debate. It's really important that we are able to share our views and hopefully we can answer some of your questions. So again, my name is Vicky Hillborn, and if I am selected to be Western Region Councillor, my main objective will be to make sure that Western Region's voice is clearly heard at Council. I will endeavor to ensure that we increase transparency into Council and staff decisions, and in particularly ensure that Western Region PEO members understand how PEO is delivering onto responsibilities to regulate the engineering profession in the public interest. I've been involved in a number of chapters, in the chapter, Brantford chapter in particular, and committees within the PEO. And I've also been on a number of boards. And so with that experience, I'm able to bring a strong appreciation about how PEO can continue to improve and its role of regulating the engineering profession and also to protect the public interest. I understand the importance of working collaboratively with council members and ensuring that the input of PEO members is brought in front of council and considered when making key decisions. As many people are aware, PEO is in a critical transitional period. And We need to make sure that we continue to move forward with that, including important initiatives such as the digitization of the licensing system and the modernization of the enforcement and discipline activities. I will make sure that Western Region's views are heard in these effects and that they're well shared within Western Region. And I will also make sure that I'm available to answer the questions of Western Region PEO members and EITs on how to traverse the complicated PEO system. So please consider voting me as a new voice for the PEO Council and make sure your voice is heard within Council and at PEO staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Vicki. So that concludes the opening remarks segment. So let's go to the questions. The first one, let's get us started, goes to Vicki. And how would you define PEO's mandate in your own words?
Thanks, Arthur. So I would definitely see PEO's mandate as protecting public safety through the regulating and advancing of the engineering profession. And I really can only see PEO doing this as being if they are trusted and professional self-regulator. Part of this means that we have strong transparency into the systems that PEO uses for its main purposes, which is the licensing of engineers and the enforcement of the PEO Act, as well as discipline of licensed engineers, and making sure that we have the necessary competencies within the profession to protect the public. And I really feel like we need to make sure that beyond transparency, we have equal access to the profession within PEO. So that means ensuring that the profession reflects the public that we're serving. So that means increasing the amount of women, the amount of Indigenous people, and underrepresented groups. And I think not only is that a part of the PEO mission, but it should become a really fundamental part of the mission. Thanks, Arthur.
Thank you. Wayne? How would you define PEO's mandate?
PEO is responsible to protect the public through the Administration and Enforcement of Professional Engineers Act. That sounds like a really nice formal answer, but basically what PEO has to do is it has to support its licensed members in their effort to protect the public themselves. Every member of the PEO is important to us. And I have worked in the past and will continue to try to work to ensure that every member's voice is heard, and that we don't have a situation of us against them when it comes between PEO office and the membership. Thank you.
Thank you. So the next question starts with Wayne. And being that we are currently very much in a COVID world, the next question is with respect to that. What challenges and opportunities are apparent from how PEO operations responded to the COVID-19 pandemic? And how should PEO prepare for similar emergencies or disruptions in the future?
That's a very interesting question, Arthur. The biggest challenge that we had seen is as soon as the lockdown was done, licensing was pretty much put to a dead stop. There was complaints back and forth and nothing was happening. And at the time, I'd actually taken some of these complaints up to find out that several files were basically left in the office, obviously because they didn't really have time to do anything about it. PEO has made some strides to improve that, so the digitization of the licensing system. However, I think further work in that area could be done to ensure that these kind of work stoppages don't happen again. We also have to have a detailed emergency plan being brought forward in every department of PEO that would end up going to the CEO and eventually presented to council to ensure that in the event that PEO office is closed again, that every department knows what they're doing and every member knows what has to happen in those departments in the event that they can't get in. Thank you.
Thank you. Vicki?
Thanks. I think COVID has really shown a number of really interesting things, including the opportunities that came out of COVID. So showing that we can work at home well and being able to interact maybe sometimes more directly with PEO staff via Teams or via Zoom platforms and being able to work with them. And I think that's been really good because it started to expand the connection between PEO members and PEO staff. Overall, though, I think PEO has demonstrated that they need to improve their communication with PEO members. They have struggled with this with COVID, and partially because they don't have that in-person interaction that they're used to having. So the AGM and the different events that they normally have to interact with PEO members couldn't happen. And we've lost that direct communication with members. And I think that's a really big opportunity that PEO can do, is better connect with their members through social media, through communications, and through chapters. Thanks.
Thank you. And now, staying in the theme of strengths and weaknesses, what weaknesses, if any, do you believe the PEO should improve in its role as a regulator or in its governance model? And that goes back to Vicki.
So I think PEO has demonstrated that they want to have a strong focus on regulating the profession. And I do think that the reason they're focusing on that is because that's been a huge weakness for PEO, is the strong regulation of the PEO profession and focusing on the three core elements of that regulation, which is the licensing of new engineers, the enforcement of the act, as well as discipline of licensed engineers. I do really commend PEO's work to try to modernize these efforts, but I really think we need metrics and transparency into these efforts to make sure that we are continuing to work on it. I also think that PEO continues to struggle with having diverse voices in the PEO membership. As someone that represents a rural chapter, it is challenging for PEO to reflect that with having urban staff. And so I think that would be an excellent place as well for PEO to expand, is staff in rural areas, as well as staff that better reflect the public that they're representing. Thanks, Arthur.
Thank you. Wayne?
The challenges PEO, they do have a number of challenges coming forward, but honestly, I think our biggest challenge that we have seen in past years is a general apathy towards the profession, especially among members. If you've taken a look in some of the past election turnouts, you'll see that we're seldomly above 10% voter turnout. In fact, last year, I think we averaged somewhere in the neighborhood of 11%. We cannot meet our mandate without our members on board. We have to get our members interested in the profession again. How do we do this? We do this by involving them in the profession. We do this by including them in the discussion. Not just communicating with them, but actually listening to them and hearing what their concerns are. We are actually all on the same team here, and it's very important to understand that our members do have a voice, and they need to have that voice heard.
Thank you. And staying within the theme of strengths and weaknesses, what are PEO's strengths as a regulator? And that goes over to you, Wayne.
One of PEO's biggest strengths, to be honest, in my view, has been the chapter system and its governance of the chapter system. It is something that has enabled PEO to strive away from a Toronto-centric regulator and actually reach out to some of the more rural areas and deal with some of those more rural concerns. In the past, the chapters have actually helped develop the Government Liaison Committee, so that it is actually done through regional concerns, and not just what works best for Toronto. It is something that we need to strive further on to try to improve ourselves.
Thank you. And Vicki, PEO strengths?
I think part of PEO strength is the long tenure of our ability to regulate the profession. We've been regulating the profession for almost 100 years, and we've been doing it in a way that's protected the public well. There has not been catastrophic failures of systems in a systematic way across Ontario. And I really think that demonstrates that PEO is generally doing a good job to regulate the profession, even though they could, of course, improve it over time. Another piece that PEO has done well is anticipating the risks that could impact the profession. A big example of that is PEO's work on increasing the governance or changing how we govern the profession, and the focus on really focusing on regulating the profession versus other activities that PEO could focus on. And I think that's really critical because we only have so much money, we only have so many resources, and being able to anticipate the risk of not focusing on regulation and doing the work necessary to regulate is important before government steps in and requires us to do so. Thanks, Arthur.
Thank you. And looking at yourselves, what do you see as your role as a councillor? That as a member of the board of directors in the fulfillment of the PEO mandate, which you described earlier. That goes over to Vicki.
Well, I think the role of a councillor, particularly of a regional councillor, is to bring the views of that region to council and make sure that they're heard well. Another piece I see is making sure that PEO has a strong strategic focus on what we should be focusing on, and it's trying to stay out of the intricate details of how they operationalize those strategic details. And I would really stress that I think that the big role of council, as I said before, is to bring in those views of different regions. PEO is not strong at consulting with PEO members. And I really feel as though councillors need to be bringing in those voices and ensuring that consultation is happening both with PEO members and the public at large to make sure PEO is meeting its mandate and reaching the future goals that we need to reach. Thanks, Arthur.
Thank you, Vicki. Wayne?
Thanks, Arthur. This is a fascinating question, actually. As a councillor, and again, particularly as a Western Regional councillor, as Vicki has said, a big part of our job is to actually bring the voices of those members of the Western region to council, to make sure that Western regional issues are actually being heard. That communication also goes both ways. Part of the job also is to make sure that Western region understands what the PEO head office is doing and why they're doing that. Moving forward, a big part of the regional councillor's job is going to be helping the chapters fit in with a new governance model, making sure that the unique skills that the chapters have to offer are being utilized in such a way that ensures the PEO's mandate is being met in the most effective way possible. Thanks.
Thank you, Wayne. Now, in previous responses, you both have touched on governance that has been going on at the PEO. So let's get into that a little bit. In March of 2020, PEO Council approved a new governance roadmap. And in November of 2020, Council approved a timed work plan to implement the roadmap. Could you please highlight what new governance directions are most important to you as a prospective councillor? And that's to you, Wayne.
Okay, thanks. There are actually two. First off, as I have said several times already, is the role of chapters. I believe that chapters are invaluable to the PEO. And if utilized correctly, it can be a huge asset to help PEO meet its mandate under the new governance model. In addition to that is also ensuring that diverse voices are being heard. I have recently been involved with the anti-racism task force to ensure that in this new governance roadmap, there is actually a committee of council to go through and make sure that there is no levels of systemic racism within our systems. And I think it's very important that we make sure that work happens. Thanks.
Thank you, Wayne. Vicki, your response?
So I really think that it's critical for the governance directive that PEO continues to focus on modernization of its operations, particularly working around licensing, and then also increasing the transparency into the enforcement and discipline activities. I think these are really important. And the role of council in that is to make sure that PEO staff are developing and sharing metrics related to this transparency and licensing. PEO is not always great, as I've talked to before, but communicating their activities to the PEO membership. And I really see a big part of this governance direction is making sure that it's clear what we're expecting of PEO staff and delivering those efforts to PEO membership. The other piece that I do think is really critical is to make sure that we're doing adequate consultation with PEO membership and the public at large to ensure that PEO is meeting the expectations of both the membership and the public. Thanks.
Thank you, Vicki. Now, I'm going to go to one of the questions that have been brought to us from online. I'm going to just read it mostly verbatim. This is the first year I've seriously contemplated whether to renew my PEng license as a software engineer. What can PEO do to attract more members and retain existing members from the software engineering discipline? And that's over to you, Vicki, excuse me.
Yeah. So I think it's a really good question, and PEO has been having this discussion for a long time about whether to really strongly regulate professions, the more emerging professions, even though software engineering has been around for a long time. And I think part of what PEO needs to do is make sure that we understand what the outcome would be for regulating these professions. How would that protect public safety? And is that protected in other ways? So I don't think we necessarily should just increase PEO membership for the good of increasing PEO membership. I think we should do it for a good reason and for a solid outcome. And so I think that we really need to do a close consideration of the current protections around software and software engineering. And is there other ways that that is being regulated? If we identify a clear gap, then that is where PEO should step in and ensure that the PEO Act is being enforced for those types of areas. But I don't think we should just do it to increase membership. We should be doing it carefully to avoid duplicate regulation of software engineers. Thanks.
Thank you, Vicki. Over to you, Wayne.
This is a very interesting question and actually can go beyond the software engineer into just about every discipline. Ultimately, PEO has a problem with the perceived value of the engineering license. Even among its members, several members that I have spoken to over the years saying that they are licensed simply because they get cheaper insurance because the Act tells them they have to. We have to get the engineering license to the point where it is silly not to have a PEng doing certain work. And this includes software engineering. Software engineering has been considered an emerging discipline, but with the bringing forth of automated vehicles and everything else, we're seeing that it is more and more a public safety issue for software engineers. But to the summary of the answer there, we just have to make it that people take pride in the engineer and they want to be an engineer. They want to be an engineer because the public wants to trust them as being a professional engineer. And the companies know that having a professional engineer on staff, it helps them. Thanks.
Thank you, Wayne. And from a public protection standpoint, what, if any, value do you see in PEO's efforts to increase the rate of licensure of engineering graduates, Canadian or internationally trained? Wayne, that question goes to you.
The value of increasing licensure is immense. And we're not just talking about increasing our membership and having more dues coming in. Licensure, the more people we have licensed in our engineering disciplines, means the more people that are actually following the Act, more people who are taking responsibility for their actions. Those members who have gone through and gotten a degree and haven't bothered to get their license, or for whatever reason decided the license isn't necessary, we no longer know what they're doing. We no longer have any control over how they are performing these jobs that they're choosing to do. And so they're basically operating in darkness to us. And that is a huge public protection problem. Thanks.
Thank you. And Vicki?
Director. So I completely agree with Wade in the sense that we have to be careful that we're not just expanding the number of PEO members for increasing the membership sake. And again, we need to make sure that we're filling a specific gap in public safety. And the PEO Act does allow us to do that and to regulate the profession. But by increasing the membership and to bringing in internationally trained engineers, one of the big impacts that can have is making sure that people are accessing the services that engineers provide. So if you've ever constructed a building or done a similar task, you know that hiring an engineer can be expensive and people avoid it because of that and the inconvenience sometimes and the time it takes. So having more engineers, that means that we can access them more quickly and maybe for a different type of rate. The other thing I would reflect is that really to ensure that it's publicly safe, we want to make sure the engineering professions reflects the public that is here. And by bringing in internationally trained engineers, we're making sure that the profession reflects the public that we're here to serve. Thanks.
Thank you. And trying to stay within sort of a similar theme, is there anything Peo can or should do to enhance its public interest protection mandate? And Vicki, that's to you.
Well, I would really say that PEO, what they can do is ensure that they have a strong and transparent way to respond to complaints that were being received to the PEO. And that includes ensuring that people that are using the professional engineering or simply the engineer term without being licensed are being prosecuted or at least being followed up. There's been complaints, for example, in Western Region of MPP candidates who are using the word engineer. And when those complaints were filed, there wasn't a transparent way that it was being demonstrated that they're being followed up with. And I think that's really troubling because it makes people feel like the PEO doesn't care that we have people using the term engineer without them being disciplined. And I really think that PEO needs to increase the transparency around those disciplinary actions to make sure people feel confident that the engineering profession is being protected and that the term is well secured. Thanks.
Thank you, Vicki. And Wayne, over to you. Is there anything PEO can or should be doing to enhance?
First off, I do very much agree with Vicki is that we do need a greater transparency in our complaint system. Having made a complaint in the past on somebody who was operating or doing engineering without a license and never heard what was actually being done is very frustrating. And can be frustrating for just about anybody who is actually going through the effort of it. Anything we can do to enhance the public interest beyond that is getting more people to actually make those complaints. First, we need to get our members and the general public on board with our efforts. PEO have a very difficult time meeting its mandate and regulating the profession if the general public is not on board. They're the ones that are seeing these things happen. They're the ones that are actually utilizing non-licensed engineers. They're the ones that are trying to get engineering technicians to do engineering work, as opposed to actually seeing a professional engineer for it. Beyond that, it is critical that our members are informed. We cannot have any hope of meeting our mandate if our members do not take an interest in the profession.
Thank you, Wayne. And some of your answers did bring to mind one of the online questions that I've received tonight. So I'll give it here. It's very few technical or hardware software companies that practice professional engineering have a certificate of authorization. Some have mentioned that it is because they provide an off-the-shelf product or do not offer a service. And I wanted to see what your thoughts are, whether tech companies should acquire a certificate of authorization. And next question goes to Wayne.
That it really does kind of depend on the services that tech companies are offering. The idea of the certificate of authorization is to ensure that any company who is offering engineering services does so in a safe manner, is hiring the professional engineers, has the proper insurance, or is at least informing people if they don't have the proper insurance. So really, as far as the tech company is concerned, if they're offering off the shelf and not actually doing any particular engineering on that, then no, they wouldn't need a certificate of authorization. However, if they are using these or making engineering recommendations for these parts, or if they're actually doing any design work on these parts or any modification on these parts, then definitely they do have to have a PEng on staff, and they do have to have someone taking responsibility for it through a C of A.
Thank you, Wayne. Vicki, over to you. Thoughts on whether tech companies should acquire a C of A?
So I do think that this question would be best answered by PEO staff and people who are experts in the PEO Act. Wayne and I have done a lot of work in this area, but we're not experts on the PEO Act. And so in order to determine if a software company or similar company needs a certificate of authorization, we need to have prepared standards and guidelines to help companies understand if they need it and why they need it. We do have some of those guidelines, but they tend to be really long and difficult for companies to understand exactly yes or no if they need it. And PEO also sometimes struggles to give that in-depth and in-person or close contact explanations to companies to explain if they need a certificate of authorization. The other thing is, I think this does go back to the last discussion we were having around transparency. And if someone reports a company and they do not have a certificate of authorization, is there follow-up to say, did they need one? Why did they need one? And ensuring that the company understands either way if they need a certificate of authorization and why they need it. Thank you.
Thank you, Vicki. So as we come to getting closer to the end, let's talk a little bit more about yourselves. Give you an opportunity just to, what's special skills, experience, ideas do you bring to enhance the governance of PEO? And that question goes to Vicki first.
Sure. So I do have a number of experiences as board members previously. So I have been a board member for 3 boards, both with a Canadian and Ontario focus. And in those boards, I have provided a number of things, including being vice chair and treasurer, where I provided the different professional skills that are necessary to govern different organizations. I have a number of PEO experiences. I have been the chapter chair of Brantford chapter, so bringing that experience, as well as bringing experience as both a chair and vice chair of committees, including the Government Liaison Committee and the Equity and Diversity Committee. From my work side, I spend a lot of time of my job doing consultation and listening to a wide variety of views of both engineers and of agricultural sector, and making sure that those views are brought into different policies and programs that are being delivered by government. And a big part of what I do as well is developing metrics to make sure that we're communicating well with both senior management and with the profession at large. So thanks.
Thank you, Vicki. And to Wayne.
Yeah, I have been volunteering with the PEO now going on 17 years as a chapter executive on 2 separate chapters, both the Hamilton-Burlington chapter and the Niagara chapter. Done 4 years as chapter vice chair and 6 years as chapter chair. I've coordinated the government liaison program for 3 years. I founded the GLP Academy, and I've served on PEO's legislation committee and the regional councillors committee. And I'm currently working on the license committee and the anti-racism, anti-discrimination working group. This has given me a wide variety of experience within the PEO. And if I can use that experience to actually enhance what our goals. On the working side, as an engineering consultant, actually not a consulting engineer, just to be clear on that, but I work with a number of engineering companies, and I have the opportunity to speak to various engineers in different capacities, and I have an understanding of what their needs are and what their frustrations are with the licensing system and with PEO in general. Thanks.
Thank you, Wayne. So in the last question before we get to the closing remarks, and I wanted to give a bit of credit to it. There was a number of questions that came in on the board with respect to self-regulation. And I wanted to, and I just want to highlight the number of the questions sort of have the same theme, and I'd summarize as such, and just this will be the last question before closing remarks. What do you see as the biggest threat to self-regulation as it pertains to PEO and the engineering profession? And that goes over to Wayne.
The biggest threat I'm seeing, and I've mentioned this several times already, is generally a lack of interest among our members. We have to have our members interested in our governance process. They have to take an interest in the profession within which they're serving. Without that, we have no hope of meeting our mandate. We have no hope of reaching out to the public and saying, trust an engineer. And we have no hope of manning further councils. We have to keep our members interested. We have to get our members engaged. We have to have those conversations, and they have to tell us what it is they actually want, and we have to listen to that. Thanks.
Excuse me. Thank you, Wayne. Vicki, over to you. The threats, what do you believe are the threats to self-regulation?
I believe the biggest threat to self-regulation is the lack of transparent processes and procedures, particularly related to licensing, discipline, and enforcement of the PEO Act. In general, without transparent processes, the public might lose faith that we are actually regulating the profession in a way that benefits the public. And I do think that there needs to be a way to ensure that we are being open and honest about what we're doing and also how we're following up with the different complaints that are being filed. I also believe that one of the other big threats to self-regulation is not ensuring that the regulation reflects the public that we are serving. The PEO profession needs to make sure that we have more women, more Indigenous people, more underrepresented groups that show that we have the right people delivering engineering professions so that reflect a diversity of views and ensuring that we're making the best products, the best buildings, and the best structures possible and as safely as possible. Thanks, Arthur.
Thank you very much, Vicki. So this concludes the question portion of the meeting. And now each candidate has 90 seconds for closing remarks. The order of which is the same as the opening remarks, where candidate 1, Wayne Kershaw, your closing remarks.
Okay. Thank you very much, Arthur. I'd like to say that our members within Western Region have a very difficult choice in front of them. Both Vicky Hilborn and myself have had a great deal of experience with the PEO, and as you could tell from some of our responses today, have a great deal of passion for what we believe in. I would like, in closing, to ask everyone to vote, and not just vote, but have these discussions with your colleagues, with your friends in the engineering profession, and get them to vote. We have to get the membership to say what they want, and we need to get our membership actually involved in some of these discussions. Finally, I'd like to thank Vicki for challenging the discussion tonight, and thank you also, Arthur, for moderating this discussion. Thank you all. Good night.
Thank you, Wayne. And Vicki Hillborn, your closing remarks.
Thanks, Arthur. So I'd really like to thank Arthur for doing a great job leading the discussion today. I know it is challenging, and really like to thank Wayne as well for having, as he said, a little bit of a good debate, but a respectful debate, which I think really reflects the professionalism that we have within as engineers. And number 3, I guess, I would really like to thank everybody who is watching today and taking a really big interest in who the right candidate is for Western Region. We are a really important region within the PEO, and we want to make sure that our voices are being heard within PEO Council and by staff. And the only way we can do that is by having a strong councillor who will really push to have our voices heard. And I feel like I can be that councillor, and I am excited and willing to bring our voices here and to make sure that I hear what you need. So what does that mean? It means that I will be as transparent as possible in my decision-making as a councillor, and also be ready and willing to respond to your questions and any concerns that you're bringing up as a member. So I will be very honest and open with my email and with my phone number, and really ready to respond to you. So please vote. As Wayne said, make sure you get out there, vote, make sure your coworkers vote, and your friends that are professional engineers vote as well. And I really hope that you'll consider voting for me as a new voice for council during this really critical period in PEO's history. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And this concludes tonight's discussion. I really would like to thank the candidates for their participation, and also those watching for your interest in the governance of the engineering profession. I really hope you found these meetings to be informative and worthwhile. And I hope if you are watching this, I'm going to assume you're going to vote. And I hope you will encourage others to vote as well. As a reminder, a recording of the meeting will be on PEO's website for the duration of the election. Thank you again, and to everybody for participating in our discussion. And remember, your profession matters. So, does your vote? Voting is quick and easy. You can vote on the internet by phone. Voting opens on January 14th, and voting closes at 4 p.m. on February 18th. And all the information you need is on our website at www.peo.on.ca.